Under the soft morning light of Beijing, journalists gathered inside the polished marble hall of the Chinese Foreign Ministry. Cameras clicked, microphones adjusted, and the familiar emblem of the People's Republic stood behind the podium, a scene of calm yet charged anticipation. On this October morning, the ministry's spokesperson, Guo Jiakun, would face questions that linked two of China's most sensitive subjects, espionage and foreign diplomacy. The briefing began as Guo stepped to the microphone, composed and deliberate. China and North Korea are traditionally friendly neighbors, he began, speaking in steady Mandarin. Maintaining, consolidating and developing China-North Korea relations has always been a firm and unswerving strategic policy of the Chinese party and government. Those words carried more than ceremony. They were meant to project steadiness amid turbulence. The announcement came just days before Premier Li Qiang's planned visit to Pyongyang, a trip meant to mark the 85th anniversary of the Workers' Party of Korea, North Korea's ruling party. Li, the most senior Chinese official after President Xi Jinping, would attend the celebrations alongside top North Korean leadership. Guo's remarks highlighted the official purpose of the visit: to use this opportunity to strengthen strategic communication, deepen exchanges and cooperation, and carry forward the traditional friendship between the two countries. His phrasing, like much of Chinese diplomacy, was careful, a signal that Beijing continues to see Pyongyang as a vital partner amid growing global scrutiny of its alliances. But that morning, the press corps' attention wasn't only on North Korea. The other story looming large was the UK's espionage accusations and the diplomatic storm it had unleashed. British authorities had recently dropped charges against individuals accused of spying for China, a move that had rippled across Western capitals. When asked for comment, Guo Jiakun didn't mince words. His tone sharpened slightly, though his delivery remained calm. Regarding the case you mentioned, the fact that the British judicial authorities have dropped the charges clearly proves that the accusations of espionage for China are completely groundless. He went further, accusing London of dramatizing and politicizing intelligence claims. China firmly opposes the dramatization of espionage activities aimed at exaggerating the so-called China threat, he said. We advise some people in the UK to stop harboring a paranoid sense of persecution. His statement drew murmurs in the room. The phrasing, paranoid sense of persecution, was a rare moment of rhetorical bluntness from a ministry known for cautious language. It signaled Beijing's growing frustration with what it perceives as Western attempts to portray China as a malign actor in global affairs. In the days following the press conference, British tabloids had amplified the espionage case with bold headlines, alleging infiltration in political and academic circles. Beijing's strong denial was a strategic counterpoint, both to reassure its domestic audience and to project confidence to its partners abroad. Guo's dual message that day, rejecting espionage allegations while reaffirming ties with North Korea, reflected a balancing act at the core of China's current diplomacy. On one hand, Beijing is fending off accusations of covert influence operations from Western governments. On the other, it is doubling down on its relationships with traditional allies who share its skepticism of Western-led narratives. As Premier Li Qiang prepared for his Pyongyang visit, the symbolism was unmistakable. His attendance at the Workers' Party anniversary wasn't just a gesture of friendship, it was an act of political theatre. The optics of Li and Kim Jong-un side by side would send a signal to Washington, London and Tokyo that China's neighbourhood diplomacy remains intact, even as Western pressure intensifies. Inside China, state media quickly framed Guo's remarks as a defence of national dignity. The Global Times published editorials arguing that the UK's so-called spy hysteria was driven by declining political confidence. One commentary read, "Britain's obsession with China's rise reflects its own insecurity, not Chinese wrongdoing." Meanwhile, foreign policy experts in Beijing noted that the UK case revealed a deeper trend: the West's internal struggle over how to balance trade dependence on China with growing distrust. Since 2023, several Western governments have accused Beijing of sponsoring cyber espionage and political interference. Yet at the same time, trade volumes between China and Europe have continued to grow. This contradiction, economic interdependence amid political hostility forms the backdrop for much of China's diplomatic messaging today. Guo Jiakun's words were part of a broader effort to portray China as a rational actor surrounded by irrational critics. The world should not fall into the trap of ideological confrontation, he said in an earlier briefing, echoing President Xi's call for what Beijing terms mutual respect and non-interference. But for British and European officials, the espionage saga reinforced long-standing suspicions. Intelligence agencies in the UK and Germany have repeatedly warned that Chinese influence operations are targeting lawmakers, universities, and technology firms. These warnings have led to new legislative efforts to tighten security around foreign funding and political lobbying. Yet as London points fingers, Beijing points to hypocrisy. In his remarks, Guo Jiakun hinted at double standards. Some countries have conducted extensive intelligence activities worldwide, he said, but they still accuse others without evidence. It was an implicit jab, one that reminded observers of Western intelligence scandals from Edward Snowden's revelations to WikiLeaks. The exchange over espionage might seem like a diplomatic skirmish, but in the context of 2025, it reveals the larger tectonic shifts in world politics. As the US and its allies deepen coordination on counterintelligence, China is reinforcing its partnerships with countries that reject what it calls Western moral superiority. North Korea sits at the heart of that strategy, a symbol of resistance and continuity. When Premier Li Qiang travels to Pyongyang, he will carry not just goodwill, but also strategic intent. His delegation is expected to discuss infrastructure projects, energy cooperation, and possibly cross-border transport corridors that could link Chinese industrial zones with North Korean ports. For Beijing, such cooperation is not just economic, it's geopolitical leverage. The visit also comes at a time when North Korea is reasserting itself on the global stage. Pyongyang's missile tests and renewed military drills have drawn condemnation from the US, Japan, and South Korea, but China's tone has remained measured, urging dialogue and restraint. By attending the Workers' Party anniversary, Beijing is sending a message that it will not isolate Pyongyang, no matter how intense Western pressure becomes. In that sense, Guo Jiakun's remarks about friendship were more than diplomatic pleasantries. They were part of a strategic continuum, one that sees China positioning itself as both defender of sovereignty and arbiter of stability in East Asia. Back in London, the political fallout from the espionage saga continues. While the charges have been dropped, opposition lawmakers are pressing for a parliamentary inquiry into foreign influence in British institutions. Analysts see the case as part of a wider Western trend of securitizing relations with China, from banning Huawei from 5G networks to restricting Chinese investment in critical industries. For Beijing, however, this is all part of what it calls containment under another name. In private, Chinese officials have expressed frustration that economic cooperation is being sacrificed to political posturing. China wants a relationship of mutual benefit, not mutual suspicion, one state-affiliated scholar told local media. By late afternoon, the ministry briefing had ended, but its echo lingered in international headlines. The image of Guo Jiakun standing before the crimson and gold emblem, calm, unflinching, became symbolic of Beijing's defiant posture. It was as if China was saying to the world, "We will not be defined by your accusations." As Premier Li Qiang's North Korea trip approaches, observers are watching closely for what message it sends, not just to Pyongyang, but to Washington and London. Will it signal a deepening of ideological blocs reminiscent of the Cold War, or will it reflect a pragmatic effort to stabilize regional ties amid global volatility? For now, Beijing's strategy appears clear. Counter criticism with composure, build alliances with consistency, and remind the world that in its view, the era of Western moral authority is over. The day after Guo's press conference, Chinese state television replayed his remarks with careful emphasis. Subtitles highlighted the phrases "completely groundless" and "stop harboring paranoia." Commentators framed the UK case as proof that Western allegations collapse under their own weight. In foreign capitals, reactions were mixed. British diplomats called the statement predictable but disappointing. European observers noted that the confrontation underscored how far trust had eroded between Beijing and the West. In Washington, analysts at think tanks like CSIS and the Atlantic Council suggested that China's sharp rebuttal would only harden Western perceptions of Beijing's defensiveness. And yet, beyond the politics, the broader message resonated. China was no longer content to react quietly. It was reclaiming control over the narrative. As the press lights dimmed and reporters filed out, Guo Jiakun's closing words hung in the air, an assertion of sovereignty and a rejection of judgment. We advised some people in the UK to stop harbouring a paranoid sense of persecution. It was not just a statement about a single espionage case. It was a declaration of how China sees its place in a world increasingly divided, confident, unyielding, and determined to define its own truth.